Let's drop down one more joint. We're not going to focus on this joint just right now, but what I want you to do is work on this particular exercise. Many of us have seen these particular wrist drills where you're rolling on the wrist. It's not sufficient. It's not sufficient. This is an isolation drill. To coordinate and recruit the joint, you have to move the joint. Notice this is more than moving the hand. It's moving around the node of the joint. This is going to be integral to aligning your skeleton when you're depositing force. If this is fixated, look how it recruits the muscles. You're going to limit your motion. If the mobility is supple, when you're working this particular drill, notice how you can coordinate one particular joint to program and recruit it with the rest. Your ability to keep this supple while tone is going to be an important component of your upper body regimen. Take that, and we're going to add that drill onto our torso. Now, we've concentrated on the neck, the shoulders, the elbows, and now the wrists. We need to program that, and we're already starting to recruit it into the rest of our spine. We're going to start with a drill of moving laterally with keeping the hips stationary. Moving laterally. This is taking your upper spine and adjusting it over a half plane. Notice that, not bending over. Along this particular plane, rise up, alignment, and drop over. Back and forth. You know the old maxim, miss by an inch, miss by a mile. The ability to recruit just this evasive activity because of your overall coordination could mean the difference between safety and a knockout. Safety and receiving impact. Your ability to have an overall movement program is integral. So we're going to recruit the rest of our spine when we're working on this activity. Let's add in the shoulders. We're going to drop back, but now we're going to start shifting back and forth. Shoulders are rolling as the spine is adjusting. Back and forth. See how the neck is already starting to recruit into the activity. When you take these particular movement programs, you're going to see that it's in this fashion that you can coordinate your overall activity. These aren't just activities to be done for their own sake. They're to be done to bring in your whole comprehensive potential, like we said at the beginning of the tape, comprehensive potential. So take this exercise, work back and forth. You're going to feel the respiration start to change as the intra-lung pressure starts to shift from one to the next. So keep your passage open. If you hold your breath, you're going to pass out. Keep your breath. Back and forth. Allow your neck to start to come into the motion, and you'll see that wherever your arms carry is dependent upon your trunk mobility. Sometimes our performance is not just hampered by immobility, but by social pressure. The next exercise is going to be as much of a social challenge as it is a physical one, and that deals with the mobility in the pelvis. Regardless of what style or what game you're in, the root, the trunk, the power generates from the pelvis. If you can't move your pelvis, you're recruiting your back muscles. How many times have we heard of people injuring their back muscles because they're not properly aligning and distributing the force from their legs? So in the next exercise, free your mind a bit and work on the mobility of your pelvis. I'm going to start with a lock on your glutes. Lock in as you tilt your pelvis up. Now, I could give you a visual on this if you have to go very badly. Then you're going to get the correct posture. Bring this together as tight as possible as you tilt this up. Your shoulders are automatically going to drop down as your pelvis is lifting up towards your shoulder girdle. The opposite of this motion is going to be relaxation, proper alignment from the top of your head being pulled along the line. Articulate backwards, allow the coccyx to carry open, and allow the lower back to curve. You see the shoulders start to drop back, but this is a particularly unique motion to the pelvis. It's not bending over. It's the femoral joint. the ability to articulate from the pelvis, you'll notice that this power generation is going to be integral for any type of lift or transfer of force. So from this tilt to the lock, this tilt to the lock, it's already starting to recruit into the legs. So allow this tilt so that you recover the full mobility in your pelvis. When I say a social pressure, it's not a very fighting movement to make. Well, disregard any type of preconception about your potential so that you can reclaim the full amount of activity, so that you can have your full potential accessible. Next motion is going to be from your pelvis along this plane, just like we worked along the mandible. Tilt downward. The pelvis tilts downward to allow one to travel upward. This is going to free the mobility of one of the opposite leg. So you're going to work from one tilt to the next. This is not sufficient. This is a torso motion. Transferring your weight is not sufficient. It has to be a pelvic rock from one side to the next. One side to the next. So we're going to add these motions together. From the frontal tilt to the lateral tilt to behind to the opposite, so that we're working in one range of motion for the pelvis. Your footwork is not determined on the dexterity of your feet, but on the mobility of your pelvis. If you can't free this motion, you're not going to be able to move your feet. You'll be able to move them like a robot, charging your locomotive, your large muscles, to do all of the work, instead of recruiting your entire musculature so that you can actually program and move with the most amount of biomechanical efficiency. Remember, the least amount of effort to accomplish the most significant results. So, we have this circle here. Let's take just one pelvis, one side of our pelvis, and we're working one circle over top of the balance of our foot. Switch to the opposite side, and you're already seeing how this is starting to recruit into the knee, into the knee. If you keep loose, it's going to carry down to your ankle and to your toes. We're going to cover that in just a minute. Now that we're beginning to touch upon more of the pelvic mobility, we're able to recruit into it this lower appendage. So we're going to begin with the rotation on this femoral joint. Notice that this circle, you have to allow your spine to articulate as well as your pelvis to move. Don't kick or move, carry through a range of motion. Your job here is to expand the range of motion while keeping your respiration free. Don't think of this as stretching out. Think of this as recapturing a range of motion based upon your pelvic mobility. We're going to add something into this. Bring your leg up and let your knee free as you carry through here. Don't think of this as driving from the foot. Let your balance be based on your bottom leg so that this circle from the knee is loose. I don't want you to think of trying to drive from the foot, but nice and loose, back and forth. Notice that the circle is allowing the foot to carry through whatever range of motion it needs to. Now we're going to add this onto the circle that we've just done. You can keep this at whatever speed that you need to so that you're recruiting the most amount of joints into the range of motion exercise. The same thing is true when you're coming in the opposite direction. Bring through the pelvic articulation so that the whole range of motion is included and recruitment is coordinated. Now, down to the ankle. When you work on these are probably going to be more challenging than the rest, especially depending upon the technology on your feet. If you're barefoot, it's going to be easier, but if you have non-resistant substance, it's going to allow the range of motion to travel. So take those thick, bulky wrestling shoes off or those tennis sneakers so that you don't rip apart your ankle, and work on the range of motion. Now, the first is let your knee tip in, curl your toes underneath, and roll onto your laces. From here, let your heel travel down and back around so that your toes pop back out. So around, as you're pressing your toes into the ground, one direction. Work this in both feet, in both directions. Outside toes, inside heel. Outside toes, inside heel. Now, curl the toes underneath. Now that we're working from one side of the appendage to the other, what I want to do is go back and work on particularly unique joint strength exercises. Joint circles are not sufficient for overall coordination because the range of motion on more than one joint is not merely a circle, but a circle added to a circle, or a figure eight. We're going to start with the root that we began initially. I want you to extend your arms outward, and if you need a visualization, tether your arms like you're on a rack. Tether your arms so that you don't change your plane to semaphore, like you're flagging down a plane. Keep your arms tethered to the wall, and I want you to bring one shoulder up and roll it over. You can't hold your breath to do this. If you do, you'll limit the range of motion. So tether, roll over, allow the deltoid to pass over the plane of your solar plexus. Roll it back, expand out from the solar plexus, and bring the other screw. Same thing, up and over, tethered to the far wall, and back. One should be from here. Now look at the vector of force comes along the humerus bone. Same thing, roll, other side, roll, other side. You're starting to recruit into this, the articulation of your spine. So add in your respiration. This should be tied along one plane. So it's forcing the range of motion to increase at such a tight angle. It's such a tight angle. When we come back to this, when we're screwing our arms, come back to here, and I want you to work just on this exercise, and I'm going to point out something. You're working on this. Now look down at your hands. Your hands have already begun in tracing the figure eight. If you looked at them, you probably stopped and had to start over because now the coordination is lost. It's not generating from the root. So come back to rolling the shoulders. If you're having a visualization problem, start with a circle in the front, counterclockwise, and a circle in the back, clockwise. When you bring these together, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, now you have a path upon which your arm can travel while you move from the root. If you work on this exercise and let your other hand just hang limp, because of the sympathetic nature of movement, it'll start to form the opposite motion. Coupling of forces from here. Working this back and forth. Now, the figure eight motion is everywhere. I'm only going to be showing this in a few different planes because I want you to explore this. I don't want it to become dogmatic. Your movement is going to be different than your partner's, is going to be different than mine. Explore, don't regurgitate. Come through this motion, change the frame so that now you're drawing upward. Add into it your neck mobility. At a later date, we'll discuss more complex movement patterns like the waves so that you're generating motion outward along an almost parallel figure eight. But not for now. What I want you to do is concentrate now upon this gross motor motion so that you're recruiting the most amount of joints into the activity. Let your torso, your respiration, your neck and your shoulders start to carry through the motion so that you're developing an overall motoric plan, a program upon which you can launch a particular technique, no matter what your particular game, whether it's to move in, to pummel around, to dispatch one threat, only to address your own, okay? You need to work on an overall plan. Let's turn this and move it backwards. If we were moving here, now you're rolling your shoulders over. If you're rolling your shoulders over, you're going to start to see that we're doing a different figure eight. To get a good visualization on this, I want you to turn and draw the opposite figure eight. We'll do this in the air to begin with. Start with, on the bottom, a circle, clockwise. On the top, counterclockwise. And move through counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise. Let your other arm limp. It's already going to start to carry into the motion. Opposite and equal directions. If you concentrate on moving your hands, you're going to start to get uncoordinated. Uncoordinated is a matter of isolation. Coordination is recruiting more and more joints into the motion. And it's not just in isolation. You'll start to lose the coordinated movement. Stay loose when you're working through here, so that as this motion is recruited, it's called back into your motion. You'll see where this particular asymmetrical coupling of figure eights is going to start to move your entire body, so that power generation is based upon whatever particular position you're in, so that your whole movement is coordinated together. These figure eights are going to be critical into sewing together your particular techniques, no matter what your game. Let's take this same motor program and apply it to our lower appendages. If we had this circle with the femoral joint and the knee coordinated with the ankle, if we add two circles together, we have this particular circle. Let's start with counterclockwise in front of us. Move and place a clockwise motion behind us. Counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise. In order to carry through this complex range of motion so that you're recruiting the most amount of joints into the motion, you're going to need to stay buoyant. This particular exercise is going to fatigue your feet quite quickly. We're not used to grabbing onto the ground for balance. We're used to stepping across it very lightly. We need to root ourselves in, so that requires taking the joints and rotating them. We'll talk about this in another tape when we're starting to do rooting activities of tendons and ligaments wrapping around the skeletal structure so that we're rooted into position. For now, take your foot out in front of you at a 45-degree angle, transfer your weight on top of it, and come back to this figure eight. You notice that the pelvis is buoyant. The knee and the ankle and even the toes are recruited into the motion. So we're in front. Go back to the basics. Go back to this front circle of coming counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise. Now, in a later series, when we talk about leg fencing, the ability to move and coordinate your pelvis with your leg motion, it's going to be critical that we work now on this particular movement program. The more coordinated that you become, the stronger your tendons are going to become, and the easier it will be to facilitate your movement into one technique to another. You can base upon your particular tactics on an overall movement strategy. Take this figure eight and turn it around. We're going to move now for a clockwise circle in front, and behind us, a counterclockwise circle. So now, as you carry through counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise. Notice how the articulation turns in your position to open up your pelvis. You need to explore this. It is nearly impossible to talk about every little nuance in a joint complex, such as an appendage. You need to explore this exercise thoroughly so that you're rotating into the ground, screwing, pulling, and drawing your balance based upon an overall movement scheme. This is going to give you the lightning quick reflexes you need because you're not coming up here to access a particular skill. It's based upon an overall movement program upon which the platform of your techniques are launched. So, figure 8 forward, figure 8 backward, switching, and take that. Now, I'm going to drop down a level. I want you to use both legs. If you can do both legs while standing, then call me because we're going to make a table levitation. But now that you're on the ground, I want you to work on coordinating these two figure 8s together. You can see the relevance that we've already had from the first volume when we worked on switching shin boxes and leg threading. But here, this ability to coordinate two asymmetrical figure 8s is going to give you a fending quality that you haven't had before because it's based on an overall movement set. When we go on, we're going to take this and go one step further and intensify the tensile strength of each particular joint.